I love that you wrote a phrase recently which struck me very deeply, where you said that we all have karmas, both superficial and held deep. And in the last few years I've experienced a number of traumatic incidents, some of which you know about.
I've experienced numerous of them myself. You got a minute? Mm-hmm. What about it?
What I feel like I've always practiced with my fear. I've always been a fearful character.
Hmm?
I've always been a fearful character.
Well, who isn't? It's very reasonable. Anybody who's in this situation is not afraid, doesn't have any awareness of what's actually going on. What you do about it is another matter, but there's every reason to be afraid. And if you weren't aware enough of the potential suffering, in the states of conditional existence, then you wouldn't be motivated to transcend them. So as bizarre as it seems, there's a kind of grace in the sufferings that are imposed on us through experience. But so, you've been fearful by tendency.
Well, I feel these recent events have exaggerated or locked this fear further in my body in some way.
You fear that?
Yes.
Fear is inherent in the body, in its separateness. The fear isn't yours at all. The fear is in the self-contraction. It is its characteristic mood, its inherent emotion. You could be feeling fear now, and yet there's nothing dramatic happening at the moment that would seem to justify being afraid. But if you somehow or other bring to mind the potential of life difficulties in this moment, or remind yourself of traumatic experiences you've had, by remembering them and so on, you can be experiencing fear right now without any apparent cause. It would be entirely, obviously, subjective. But nonetheless, it's still the same thing. It is the mood of self-contraction, the mood that is inherent in self-contraction, in the presumption of separateness, in the presumption of identification with the body as the position of existence. And if you presume it is the position of existence, then you start puzzling over, what do you do about this? Is there some way to escape this? There doesn't appear to be any way to escape it. And so fear becomes a kind of fixed sensation. It becomes a chronic sensation, in fact, potentially. Very disabling sometimes. And so everyone has experiences of one kind or another, just the mere fact of being alive and what had to occur in order for you to be alive, birthing and so on, plus all the experiences of a lifetime, in effect, as you suggested, embed fear in the, the body or the psychophysical mechanism. And this is fundamental to the condition of everyone here, of every human being, of every living being. Although everyone's in a different disposition or sense of circumstance or state of mind in the present moment, nonetheless, all are sitting in a situation, and everyone is in the midst of an activity, in fact, right now, that is generating fear. Except that, generally speaking, people use various psychological devices to keep it subliminal or to generate diversions, a kind of intoxication, or even literal intoxication, by using intoxicating means, but diversions of life, experiential means to divert attention through generating intentionally or otherwise by circumstance experiencing different states of mind, of emotion, of body that desensitize you, at least temporarily, to the fundamental fear that is at the root of this bodily sense of separate existence. And this is not, therefore, merely your characteristic. It is the actual state of everyone, and it is, therefore, something that is right there. Everyone is always sitting in it. And how much of your life you want to waste diverting yourself from it or consoling yourself and so forth. Intoxicate yourself is up to you, but you can't really get rid of it because it's inherent in the presumption of identification with the state of separateness and brevity, change, and inevitable death. You can't escape that, so you cannot escape fear. Unless something fundamental changes about your understanding and experiencing of existence itself, you cannot get rid of fear. There is no intoxication, no diversion, nothing that will desensitize you, that is anything but temporary. And in the long run, very destructive of any kind of balance or well-being or clarity. So you, rightly, if you consider the matter clearly, you have to address this fundamental matter. There's nothing you can do about it, except whatever it is that utterly transcends the root presumption that is the cause of it. is there an understanding and a realization of existence that is free of the root conditions that you are experiencing fearfully? And of course, I'm telling you there is. Uh, there's also something about fear that has a practical value. Without it, you wouldn't do what was necessary to protect the body under various natural circumstances that require an immediate reaction for the sake of safety. You wouldn't want to be so benumbed in the midst of daily life that you couldn't react to something dangerous and get out of the way. So there's also something very practically useful about fear in its moment. Cats are very sensuous. They was walking around rubbing themselves on things, purring away and so forth. They look like they haven't a care in the world, but just like that, if anything comes up that requires a reaction or mouse that they can enjoy tormenting, anything that requires a sudden reaction, which inevitably has a fearful characteristic in it, because there's so much sudden energy and chemical change and so forth, they're always ready. Zap, they do it. And then the next moment, they're perfectly calm again. So this kind of capability for fear is certainly not something you would want to have tranquilized to the point where it's no longer available to you. You wouldn't be able to function safely in the midst of ordinary things. So, that's not a kind of fear that one would rightly want to get rid of, unless one is just an addict of some kind who wants to be totally dysfunctional. But apart from that, practical usefulness of fear, the fear you're describing is a kind of philosophical or philosophically significant condition. It's the noticing of the fundamental condition in which you're living. The way I have given you all is the means for transcending just exactly that. It's not a diversion, a way of being addicted to some manipulation of the body-mind that just makes you feel good at will by some technique or other. As long as things aren't too bad, you can always sit down and meditate and relax. You've perhaps noticed one another. You think that's bliss. It's no more bliss than an orgasm is bliss. It's that kind of bliss, if you want to use the word for it. In other words, it's a temporary state of pleasure in the body. It has nothing to do with transcending fear. It is simply an experiential diversion that covers it. So the kind of self-manipulative games people play that have the look of meditation or religion about them are devices, techniques, whereby people divert themselves from experiencing reality, and reality in the conditional sense. And it's inherent. Fearfulness. It's inherent dangers. It's inherent mortality. So that kind of meditation isn't worth squat. It's nothing more than relaxation. It's just another form of self-pleasuring. It's a technique. And it's temporary, and if this kind of, everything is just so sweet, and you suddenly were tapped on the shoulder by something with a mouth on it about this big. You're going to be immediately returned to your sensitivity to like inherent fear. So, fine, there are states that are meditative that look like that, so I'm not mocking them entirely, but on the other hand, they have no ultimate significance whatsoever. So, it is a moment-to-moment realization. Moment-to-moment practice, moment-to-moment renunciation, moment-to-moment realization. This is all that works, and nothing else does. All the rest is a diversion, a hoped-for pleasurable distraction. So you have had some experiences fairly recently that were traumatic, and feel this has even created a kind of fear reaction built it into the body, and now you're afraid of it too. You're afraid of being afraid of being afraid. But it doesn't make any difference whether you're afraid, or you're afraid of being afraid, or you're afraid of being afraid of being afraid, or you're afraid of being afraid of being afraid of being afraid, or on and on to the nth degree. It's still the same thing. And you have to do the same thing about it. And why add a lot of imagination to it? Fear is all the same, and it's completely justified. You have every right to be afraid. You're in a position in which it is completely justified to be afraid, and there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't be, so you should be quite happy about the fact. Behaving and feeling quite normally. There's nothing wrong with you. You are completely well, my son. But if you're seriously asking the question about fundamental fear itself, well, haven't I addressed this? The way I've given you is my address to that question that is the totality of your life. See, it's not a bunch of myths or things for you to believe that are somehow supposed to make you feel that fear is unjustified and everything is just okay. No, everything is really not okay. So, but that's a fact only from the point of view you are presuming, and that is what must be examined and transcended, and not by merely thinking about it. You will think about it inevitably, but that's not the way. The way is exactly as I've given it to you to practice, and that's exactly what you should do about it. And do so moment to moment, in other words. Endeavor to be constantly doing this sadhana and developing the real process of it instead of remaining at the beginning of it forever. Simply bound up not only in unsatisfactory states, but not even entering into the real process whereby they are understood and ultimately transcended by spiritual means. Sadhana proves itself. Do the sadhana consistently for real instead of doing something else, which is like sitting around hallucinating your fear more and more, you see, wasting your time turning the faculties on themselves instead of turning to me, and profoundly practicing. Instead of wasting your time doing what is unproductive about it and trying to get rid of something you cannot get rid of, spend your time doing as I've instructed. Embrace me and enter into the process of communion with me, whereby you will utterly transcend not just the feeling of fear because it's inevitable in this state here, you see, but transcend the very state you are presuming to be in. The sadhana of this way truly and most profoundly entered into, you see, enters you fully consciously into the domain of reality itself, the divine domain of reality that transcends conditionality, and that activity which makes all illusions, including fear. As long as there is the self-contraction, presumption of separateness, there is fear. And there is no two ways about it. It's inevitable, it's inherent. So, transcend this. The way is the way of transcending the self-not, the self-contraction, which is not just something somewhere inside the body, it is the totality of the body-mind that's participating in this, and that is reflecting this act. This is what must be gone beyond. This not is fear. It is also separateness. It's the feeling of difference. It's the feeling of relatedness. It's the presumption of being identical to the body, or the body-mind. Limited by it, living limited to it, limited by and to all of the ordinary appearances of conditional existence, all of which pass, and all of the grosser appearances of human existence, all of which are mortal. The transcending of this is in fact something you enjoy in some rudimentary sense in sleep. You're not here asleep, basically anyway, at the moment. You're in the waking state, self-contracted as the body-mind. You're asking me this question from the point of view and position of feeling identical to the body and its potential, its memory, and so on. But when you are asleep, you don't ask these questions. And you don't make these presumptions. A few minutes ago, I was asked about a dream state condition. In that particular dream state condition, the person wasn't feeling mortal or depressed or afraid, and didn't have any problem about it. But then in the waking state, all of a sudden, it's time to ask me a question because of this. The waking state is habitually bound to the activity of egoity. The dream state is a conditional state. It is filled with conditional appearances, positive and negative. Sometimes in the dream state, things feel very blissful and amusing, even in a very high sense. And at other times, of course, they can be very frightening and so on. The sleep state never feels any of those things. And yet, it's not awake in the absolute sense. Otherwise, it is simply asleep to the binding conditions of the waking and dreaming states. Divine self-realization is to be awake to that which is prior, not only to the waking and dreaming states, but to the sleeping state as well. But it's completely without bondage to any limiting condition. Inherently so. Just as in sleep, you are inherently not bothered by waking state conditions or memories. You're not bothered by dreams, nor diverted by them. So in the real state, the state that is always already the case, the divine self-condition, there is no fear and nothing to be afraid of. There is no self-contraction. This is worth realizing, don't you think?